All right, let us get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Shauna Pomerantz, and I am a professor in the Child and Youth Studies Department at Brock University in Canada. And I want to say good morning to some of our panelists who are coming from Sydney and Auckland in the middle of the night. And good morning to you, or good afternoon, or good evening. This is Rethinking Everyday Girl Objects. And I just want to remind you once again that we're recording this panel. And I'm going to now introduce the panelists and read a short bio, and then we'll get started. So first we'll have Dawn Fields. Dawn is a punk singer and a doctoral student at the University of Florida, focusing on 20th century women's cultural studies. Su Min Hong is a PhD candidate in the Department of Gender and Cultural Studies at the University of Sydney. Tony Ingram is a senior lecturer in the School of Education at Auckland, the University of Technology, AUT, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think I've been there somewhere along the way. And Hannah Maitland is a PhD candidate in the Gender, Feminist, and Women's Studies program at York University. So just as a reminder, you're welcome to post comments or questions in the chat, which we will get to at the end of all of the talks. And I think that's it for introductory remarks. I would like to now introduce Dawn Fields.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you all, and I've been so inspired by everything that I've seen so far this weekend. This is just a really positive, great conference. My paper is titled Domestic Objects and the Girl Consumer, Play as Resistance in Polystyrene's Punk Art. In this paper, I'll analyze 1970s British punk musician and artist Polystyrene's poster, Germ Free, which she created as a promotional poster for her band X-Ray Spex 1978 anti-consumerist album, Germ Free Adolescence. In the poster, Styrene plays with images and methods of what I see as her own aesthetic brand of punk girlhood, to criticize harmful ideologies of British domestic whiteness and consumerism to young women, which she saw as leading eventually to an environmental crisis. I'll look at the poster Germ Free alongside a contemporary British commercial for Airfix glue, an adhesive made for model airplane kits and a product she includes in the poster. The Airfix ad shows that play is natural for boys and adult men, but for women, play ends badly. Styrene resituates this product in a collage with sex ed comics that is playfully cut, Xeroxed, pasted, and scribbled over with crayon. I see her using these methods as a way to take back play for herself as a young Scots Somali British woman, and as a way to publicly scoff at stodgy and, quote, corny societal expectations for British girls. Polystyrene, also known as Marion Elliott, born in 1957 and died in 2011, created a lasting aesthetic of punk girlhood in her performances and visual art during her band X-Ray Spex germ-free adolescence period, which was 1976 to 1979 in London. She was born on the outskirts of London to a Scottish mother and a Somali father. Her colorful fashion and self-described jolly demeanor inspired critics to represent her as an off-kilter version of British girlhood in punk. Regarding childhood in punk, Marie Arles Scoff says, quote, "In punk, there is a strong sense of solidarity with anyone outside the norm, and children not shaped by society's expectations became a symbol of this," unquote. The bright femme aesthetic she rocked was also a stylistic rebellion against the, quote, boring dungarees aesthetic of second wave feminism. And that's Angela quoted in Berker's. She both anticipated and heavily influenced the emphasis on an aesthetics of girlhood in the riot grrrl third wave feminism in the US in the 1990s. Although I see her doing feminist art and performance, she protested second wave feminism by refusing to identify as a feminist. Separatist second wave feminism did not serve young, working class women of color like Eliot. And in London punk, it was important to keep working relationships with men as bandmates and promoters, and even more important, to be vigilant against violence from the white supremacist National Front. Elizabeth Stinson suggests, quote, perhaps her stance against feminism served to nod to her own womanist subjectivity, hypervigilant of political strategies and tensions at hand, unquote. In response to these things, I see Eliot fashioning her own new wave alternative to second wave feminism that performs playfulness so that she could relatively safely convey anger and address serious issues. Jana Brown touches on connection between playfulness and anger in Black and brown women's punk performances and describes punk as a, quote, participatory theatrics. Instead of claiming second wave feminism and its methods, I see her emphasizing imagery and methods of her own youthful, self-identified, quote, Black British girlhood to engage global feminist issues. Let's look at the poster. This poster is entitled Germ Free. Her promo materials for Germ-Free Adolescence, the album, incorporate themes from the album, anti-consumerism, anti-racism, and an ambivalence toward plastics and synthetics. In posters, she played with an ironic understanding of herself as an advertiser while sending up the notion of advertising herself. She used images and text in combination to communicate with the target audience, who were in on the joke, in this case, punks and the underground music media. Germ Free, as we're seeing now, is a collage of sex ed comic strips, Xeroxed images, and scribbled, brightly colored crayon in which the artist takes mundane household products out of the everyday and places them in a disordered collage. She juxtaposes images of distressed Black women and white women with these products to push against advertisers' promises of the domestic happiness that comes from sterility and order, two very British ideals. In the poster, she situates product images and names with three generic archetypes: the young woman, the traditional wife, and the girl. The young women are framed in illustrated comic strips, and you can see those at the top and then the bottom right. Usually a framework that we'd expect to be funny, but seem to be cut from self-serious pamphlets addressing abortion and premarital sex. By cutting the images from their original context, she can expand on what it might feel like to be in crisis while being barraged with products and societal pressures. Eliot addresses the traditional wife as a marketing construct because the British mother/wife is present not through human representation, but through household products such as Savlon soap, Airfix glue, Listerine mouthwash, and birth control pills. Dr. O.G. Morrell pointed out that Afro-Caribbean girls in St. Martin here at our conference on Thursday in St. Martin tended to associate chores and domestic work with womanhood and the freedom to play with girlhood, and I see Eliot making the same associations in this poster. The traditional wife is present through the objects as a faceless chimera, a kind of corporate conglomerate mascot that goes by many brand names. The narrative is that the young women's problems could be solved, one, by using these products, and two, by settling into a gendered domestic role of a sterilizing housewife, which was a ubiquitous representation of women in ads for these products at the time. The hand of the artist, who we don't see, is the girl. She's the composer and the player, just as Eliot was in her band. She uses crayon to highlight and draw attention to the young women's voices in the comics. You can see over the dialogue, amplifying them and backing them up. She's the innocent truth teller and can make fun of anything by using crayon to make it look childish. She takes apart and resituates objects in a whole new framework. one that at first glance is a child's art project, but at closer look is a visual companion to the anti-consumerist manifesto that is the Germ-Free Adolescence album. Like layered tracks on a recorded song, the poster has layers of dynamic expression, such as the small dialogue boxes of the young women and the large, colorful product names, almost like sound. Styrene plays with satire in her method of Xeroxing items concerned with sexual reproduction and the reproductions of harmful ideologies. Copied images of condoms and birth control pills connect the reproductive and bodily atomic issues the young women are having in the comic strips. She Xeroxes a tube of Airfix glue to criticize the modeling and reproduction of British masculinities. Airfix polystyrene glue is used for Airfix modeling kits, marketed to men and young boys who want to reproduce planes, objects of war, and monsters on a smaller scale in their home. Let's look at this 30-second British Airfix commercial from the late 1970s.
It only takes a pair of tiny hands to create a monster with an Airfix kit. Slightly larger hands are needed to build a tank. And a feminine hand helps to recreate Anne Boleyn. An old hand enjoys putting the golden hind together. A very steady hand steers Concorde. There are over 4... It only takes a pair of tiny hands to create a monster with an Airfix kit.
Oh, just a sec. I'm going to replay the end there.
And all they need is a hand.
Okay. The ad models whiteness and play in connection with English boyhood and masculinity. It emphasizes white-skinned male hands that are described one after the other as, quote, tiny, slightly larger, old, and very steady. Yet it limits association of femininity and play, showing only one kit available for women. The narrator says, quote, a feminine hand helps to recreate Anne Boleyn, unquote. Instead of using a descriptive adjective for the woman's hands, they're gendered as feminine, racialized as white, and associated with arguably the most scandalous woman in English history, Anne Boleyn, who was decapitated by Henry VIII when she was accused of adultery and witchcraft. And I imagine that the Airfix kit of Anne Boleyn probably just came in like 2 pieces, and it was just an easy, 2-piece kit marketed to women for beginners. At the end of the ad, that I may have kind of skipped over, but at the end of the ad, the figure of Anne Boleyn is literally surrounded by tanks, helicopters, monsters, and heavy artillery all pointed at her, presumably to bring her to an end even more violent than her historical one, and not at the hands of one man, but of many men and dinosaurs throughout time. The glue in the poster in the bottom left on the screen has another deeper connotation in this work. It bears Eliot's self-chosen namesake, polystyrene. Reading the glue as a symbol for the artist brings even more complexity to the work. Unlike working from a model, she has the agency to pick and choose her own name and materials, then a symbol and affix. It is a strong expression of freedom and agency through play. Her reproduction and resituation of the item makes it into a kind of inside joke for punks as well, as sniffing glue was a cheap way for those who couldn't afford beer or weed to get high. And it's still funny because although it's her artist's signature on the work, it's still just a product, and she's still just selling an album, albeit an anti-consumerist one. To conclude, I believe polystyrene offered a new alternative and a rawly subversive space for expression to young Black British women, women in punk, and beyond. I hope to contribute to future visual rhetoric scholarship and girlhood studies with my ongoing research. I'm very excited about it, and I'm really glad to be here with y'all. Please feel free to reach out and contact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dawn. I want to just congratulate you on your incredible timing among the wonderful talk that you just gave. You came in just under 13 minutes, so we can breathe for 2 seconds while I say, next up is Soo Min Hong, who's going to talk about girls and their doll friends, play theories, and new materialism.
Um, okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, it's all good.
Connection might gone a bit bad because there was a storm in Sydney for a long time. So yeah, but if that happens, I'll just shut my video off, then just talk. So, hi, I am PhD candidate in University of Sydney. My thesis is about theorizing toys. So what I'm presenting today is the introductory part of my PhD project. My initial goal here is to begin unraveling the complexities of play by re-examining the old play theories and renewing them with a new materialist approach. However, this is yet a work in progress since I haven't finished my case study yet. At this point, my presentation will be more about play than girls and more about theory than practice. So please show your generosity, and any feedback or comment will be a great help for me. So first, let's suppose a simple play situation, a situation where I play rock, paper, scissors with my little brother. If I cry every time I lost and tell my brother that the rules have been changed, saying now scissors beat rocks or paper beats scissors so that I can win, he probably wouldn't want to play rock, paper, scissors with me anymore. Then, with his absence, I wouldn't be able to play rock, paper, scissors anymore because I just lost my play partner. I mean, in this way, not only my brother, but no one would want to play with me, right? So at some point, players become aware that they cannot do whatever they want to do in play, that the entire game will collapse as soon as the foundational principle is missing. That is why players control their arbitrary variations, suppressing their ardent desire to win by any means and follow the existing rules of rock, paper, scissors to continue playing. Anyone who wants to keep playing must stick to or at least pretend to respect the rules to prevent the play from falling apart. For this reason, the rules in play are both compulsory and voluntary constraints that are accepted by the participants. And this is why in Homo Ludens, Huizinga views the coexistence and balance between the rules and freedom as a core spirit of play. He concludes that the spirit of play is one of the main drivers of everything related to human civilization and culture. In the building of this, Huizinga characterizes play as follows. First, it is free. Second, it is not ordinary or real. Third, it is secluded and limited. Of these, the primary characteristic of play that Huizinga highlights is its separation from reality, because where it is not separated, no play can sustain its own principle. For instance, if we allow weapons to beat rock, paper, scissors, because they are physically or realistically stronger, the game wouldn't be rock, paper, scissors anymore. In fact, there would be no games at all. Even for plays seemingly without compulsory rules, Huizinga says that the fictionality or emotions of pretending and acting function the same as the rules instead. In other words, in plays such as imaginary play or pretend play, creating fiction becomes the rule itself. Likewise, Huizinga argues that either materially or ideally, a closed space set apart from everyday surroundings is marked out for play. Within this space, the play proceeds and the rules obtain. Huizinga calls this special space nestled in the world of everyday life, magic circle. But how can we explore the engagement of play elements in human culture in a scenario where play involves entering a theoretical space entirely separate from reality, with actions within it having no consequences beyond? Although Huizinga never fully adopts such a perspective, he indeed endorses the idea of play as separate from so-called reality, which causes decontextualization of play. Understandably, critics of Huizinga's play theory have been plentiful in this regard. Notably, Jack Erchman criticizes Huizinga for making a false assumption that play is isolated from or opposed to the rest of reality, with reality viewed as a neutral, objective, and normative prerequisite that serves as a standard to define what is ordinary or extraordinary. Ehrman argues that no reality exists before or external to play, saying that play and reality is inseparable. Criticism of magic circle are often synonymous with critics of a broader approach in game studies known as formalism, which positions the core of a game within its rule set. Formalism contends that a game is composed solely of its explicit rules, and proper game behavior involves adhering to these rules. There are clear parallels between Huizinga and formalists, as they both perceive play mainly as a human construct, as it always is considered a human who set the rules. So firstly, Huizinga's concept of play presupposes self-mastery, where individuals willingly impose limits on themselves. Players accept rules to enable play, specifically to partake in the particular kind of play. In this context, players freely choose to follow the established rules of play, meaning that their freedom is contingent upon their rule acceptance. Formalists such as Bernal Suits echo a similar position. In his work, The Grasshopper, Suits defines games as goal-directed activities in which inefficient means are intentionally chosen, and playing games as the voluntary attempts to overcome unnecessary obstacles, even without a clear reason for restricting oneself in such way. For instance, in racing games, one voluntarily goes all around the track to reach the finish line instead of taking a more direct route across the infield. Likewise, in games, more efficient means are ruled out intentionally and initiatively. Naturally, an explanation of why players adopt rules that necessitate less efficient means is required. According to Suits, understanding such behavior involves considering the attitude of players, a concept he names as illusory attitude, where players voluntarily accept the arbitrary rules of the game. However, the idea of play as a human construct gives rise to a foundational problem in the theorization of both play and plaything. Firstly, viewing play as it is dictated by its designer's blueprint suggests that plays with the same principle may have the same process, resulting in the same outcomes, turning the play into a clockwork mechanism and playing into a clock working. But no play can be reduced to any pre-designed set of rules or formal features dictating outcomes, because in actuality of play, nothing is the repetition of the sameness. For instance, not only are the doll plays between two different children different, but even when the same child is playing the exact same doll, each iteration of the child's doll play is never identical. Secondly, here the main properties of play are necessarily attributed to human players, implying that the core elements of play originate exclusively from them. In fact, Huizinga himself emphasizes multiple times that play is a non-material activity and is related to mind but matter. With This framework, things such as tracks in racing games, digital objects in computer games, or even dolls in the doll play, are considered more as extrinsic condition or mere props rather than intrinsic or essential elements of play. In this context, my project intends to follow Bruno Latour's suggestion, where he argues that the questions to ask about any agent should be: does it make a difference in the course of some other agent's action or not? Is there some trial that allows someone to detect this difference? To answer this, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that play is not a rigid or fixed structure, but a dynamic and recursive process within sociocultural context. This implies that the rules of play can be modified or disregarded at any moment in ways that are meaningful within their context. And the fact that rules in play can be changed at any moment also implies that those rules are never an absolute commitment. In fact, it can be communicated, transmitted, fixed, polished, adapted, and modified. Clearly, players make each iteration of play unique and different by deciding to what extent to maintain the original principle, making playing a creation of a new play with each occurrence. As each play is played anew, play can be understood as an ongoing process evolving during playing, thereby altering the way the play is played and restructuring itself. In this sense, each play is a creation, destruction, and newness. To play is to create and recreate the play through playing. Play is a phenomenon where its principles are made by itself real time. So if we confirm play as a phenomenon is making of its principles while proceeding, it is possible to say that one becomes a player when one starts to engage in such a process. Here, I like to share Anne Dussille's fascinating case study on Black Barbie. On the left side, we have Christie, the black doll that replaced colored Francie in 1968. She has a short afro, which was more in keeping with what was perhaps the signature black hairstyle in the 60s America. But in more recent years, Mattel seems less willing to crop Barbie's hair, especially after the company has pushed hair play to new extremes with its mass production. Combing, cutting, and styling, although hair play has been a popular subgenre of doll play for a long time, Dussille criticizes that Mattel doesn't simply respond to the desire among girls for dolls with long hair to comb, but it helps to produce those desires. So in her impromptu interview with a Black teenage girl in search of the latest Black Barbie, she heard of multiple Barbie murders and mutilations the girl had committed over the years. The girl cried, "It's the hair that hair I wanted. And soon Dussille recalls her own tortuous childhood struggles with the straightening combs, curling irons, and chemical relaxers. Now, some might say, what is the big deal about the doll's hair? They might say, if Black kids want to play with a Barbie with long hair, why not just release a long-haired Black Barbie? Then kids would be able to do whatever they want to do as much as they are free while playing, because after all, playing is something fictional. That's probably how Shani Barbie, pictured on the right side, came out in 1991. But we need to note that, as Miguel Sicard describes, whenever the materiality of the game changes, and so do the interpretations of the rules and even the play styles, Here also, it's the materiality of the Barbie that makes the principle of play, not the agency of child. As one cannot play basketball without any object to play the role of basket or ball, and one cannot race without the material condition to play the role of a track, one cannot play hair without the hair. This suggests that not only humans but also the things cause differences in play, thereby contributing to the makings of the principle in play, that they are in fact players in play. Coming back to the hair play situation, perhaps what happens when human players fail to follow the direction of the principle making process created by their co-player, the dolls, is isolation, not just in society outside of play, but also within play. Just as a child cannot see a picture up high or wheels cannot climb stairs, so too can a child be left out during play, for they are unable to befriend with their playthings.
I assume you're at time. Do you think you have about a minute to wrap up there?
I've just finished mine.
Okay.
So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Sumin. Next, we have Tony Ingram, who's going to give a talk called A Feminist New Materialist Meandering with Girls and High Heels.
Thanks, Shauna. We're sticking with the new materialist theme.
Yeah, it's a great theme.
It is. Okay, hopefully you can see that. All right, tēnā koutou katoa. So in this presentation, I draw on feminist new materialist thought, in particular Karen Barad's agential realism, to explore the entangled relations in between girls' femininities and the school ball. So in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the school ball's our sort of annual formal dance for senior students. So it's our version of the prom if you're from the US. And these events are deeply entrenched in normative discourses of femininity and beauty, governing how girls are expected to dress and behave. But these events are also rich material configurations of fleshed moving bodies, beauty body practices, material objects like clothing, photographs, and of course feelings and affective atmospheres. So in this presentation, I elaborate a new materialist understanding of the school ball girl as becoming through dynamic entanglements of human and more than human forces. In the discussion, I'll draw on data from a study that explored girls' experiences of the school ball. And I was particularly interested in the material, discursive, and affective forces that collaboratively produce bodies, femininity, sexuality, and the school ball itself. Drawing on visual and verbal fragments, I'll focus on some entanglements involving high-heeled shoes. And I'm interested in how a feminist new materialism offers a way to think about the wearing of high heels or not as a material discursive practice or mattering, where capacities and constraints are relationally produced. So high heels emerged as quite a curious force in the data. In Maggie McClure's terms, they glowed and they provoked a sense of curiosity, and they made themselves felt in a way that wasn't easily explained or even contained through a discursive approach. Discursively, high heels can be understood as a potent and enduring symbol of Western femininity. And they've certainly been a source of debate amid and within feminist scholarship, amid enduring questions of whether they're a source of empowerment or oppression. Excuse me, I got a frog. There was definitely the dominant expectation to wear heels to the ball. That was really powerful. But they also surfaced some interesting dynamics. And feminist new materialism offers a way to start thinking about high heels And that brings materiality to the fore. So there's sort of flesh, the moving, sweaty body, the form of the shoe, fabric, friction, the dance floor, the height of the heel, the height of the girl, the height of a date, perhaps. And new materialist theories have been increasingly drawn upon in gender sexualities in schooling research to bring some of the vitality or the liveliness of matter to the fore. And in my own work, I've found a new materialist ontology of sexuality is becoming, and Karen Barrad's agential realism, particularly useful in opening up different questions or ways of thinking about the becoming of bodies and femininities and sexuality. Barrad brings together feminist and queer theory with quantum physics to develop an agential realist framework that emphasizes the entanglement and relational mattering of the world. Entanglement, in Barrad's words, is not simply to be intertwined with another, as in the joining of separate entities, but to lack an independent, self-contained existence. And this idea is underpinned by Barrad's concept of interaction. Interaction refers to a relationship between things where there are no distinct pre-existing boundaries, but instead things, perhaps bodies or high heels or clothing, they're in a state of interaction where they emerge through their entanglement rather than precede it. And this approach disrupts binary frameworks that often shape how we think about the girl in relation with the world, including a divide between discourse and materiality, subject and object, human and non-human. And it also disrupts conventional boundaries or borders often associated with the body, identity and sexuality. So drawing on Barrad, girls in the school ball can be conceptualized as interactively becoming through lively entanglements. The girl and the ball are not separate, discrete entities, rather they emerge through their mutual entanglement. Hence, I use the term ball girl and the hyphen in between to signal this co-constitutive relationship. And this has enabled me to start thinking about becoming ball girl as a dynamic emergent process where bodies and femininities are relationally produced and where capacities and constraints emerge through dynamic matterings or configurings, which means they're open-ended and contingent, dependent on the relations at play. Crucial to this approach is an understanding of bodies not as objects with clearly defined boundaries or properties, but as material discursive phenomena. And in this frame, the girl body does not pre-exist relations. Instead, the body materializes or emerges through particular configurings at any given moment. And this also means that femininity is not a fixed identity or quality, and nor do we think about it purely as a discursive subject position. Rather, femininity is unstable performative phenomena, emergent via interactive relations. So we see a shift from thinking about the discursive limits of girls and femininity in relation to the school ball to consider, in Barrad's words, the conjoined material discursive nature of constraints, conditions, and practices. So like the body, beauty body practices become dynamic and fluid and unstable. They're not unilinear processes where something is simply done to bodies, but rather they emerge through messy webs of human and more than human forces and flows of effect. Elements in this image, we can think of them as sort of entangled forces, the high-heeled shoes, bodily matter, fabric, carpet, and flooring. And the traditional hierarchy between subject and object is flattened. The wearing is not something the ball girl does, rather it's produced relationally, and it takes place in between the high heels, the girl, spatial configurations, discourses of femininity, the fashion industry, consumerism, Beauty ideals and expectations, just to name a few forces. This reorientation makes us more attentive to the role of non-human matter. We're urged to think less about what the high heel represents and to more to thinking about the force of matter. What is it? What can it do? We might think about how high heels in relation with a ball girl body can affect the body in multiple ways. Movement, bodily composition, posture, ability to walk, dance, run, or perhaps inability, effective embodied responses, perhaps feeling confident, uncomfortable. In this video sequence, it shows the morning of the ball and the participant practices walking in high heels. She walks down the hallway, turns and walks back to her friend, another participant who's holding the camera. I can hear the rhythmic clunk, clunk as the high heels and the floorboards meet. The participant holding the camera speaks. We're practicing walking to just make sure we don't fall over when we actually go to the ball. And they swap roles and the second participant ambles down the hallway. The participant walking comments, I think it should be okay, but I think though if I fell over I'd be ridiculously embarrassed and that wouldn't be good. And then they crack up laughing. So a discursive reading of this video might illuminate discourses associated with feminine norms in this space, the investment and the labour that these practices require. A new materialist approach urges us to consider the material and sensory aspects as well, the fabric, the flesh, the height and the structure of the heels, the modifications in bodily posture and movement, a sense of instability and the threat of potential embarrassment. This perspective helps shift debates about high heels in the female body from dichotomous positionings of good or bad, oppressive and empowering, starting to think about what gets produced in the entanglements. High heel foot assemblages include the rubbing of flesh, fibre, sweat, to create sensations of discomfort and pain, often prompting the removal of high heels at the ball. It was not unusual to see shoes without feet under tables and feet without shoes on the dance floor and in photographs. The materiality of the body in relation with high heels produced varied feelings, including a dislike for high heels, relief about taking them off, pride at being able to keep them on. Some of these capacities emerging in this verbal fragment. The physical sensation of sore feet impinged upon dancing and movement, prompting these participants to take off their shoes. Laughing, a participant recalls how they ran back on and put their high heels on for their last song so she could feel like she lasted. And in this image, some girls are wearing shoes, some are not. Thinking about the practice of wearing high heels interactively helps account for some of the more, including the material, sensory, affective forces. It's not simply an accommodation or rejection of discursive expectations to wear high heels or to be ladylike and keep them on all night, but there's more at play. And an agential realist approach, excuse me, shifts how we think about bodies and notions of causality and agency. As opposed to agency being an attribute of someone or something, agency is not aligned with human intentionality and matter is not considered passive. But this doesn't mean it's not simply a matter of saying that material things have individual agency. Rather, agency is an emergent quality that is produced or emerges in the entanglements or the in-between. One emergent quality was the on and off wearing of high heels that I just talked about, and another is the refusal to wear them at all. While the majority of the participants wore high heels, there were 2 participants who did not. I recall this participant coming up to me on the evening with a big smile on her face, and she proudly lifted the bottom of her dress to show me her chucks. In a conversation after the ball, she noted, it was really nice. Like everyone would be like, oh, let's go take off our shoes. And I'd be like, okay. So it was really nice. And people would be like, are you wearing chucks? And she was like, yeah. And I'd lift up my dress because no one knew. They were like, why aren't your feet sore? Because I'm not wearing high heels. These fragments enact ball girl bodies in a way that do not strictly adhere to dominant expectations of girls attending the ball and traditional norms of femininity. This capacity emerges through multiple forces: the materiality of shoes, the inability to walk, memories of wearing high heels previously, confidence, and ambivalence. Choosing not to wear high heels or taking them off during the evening might be conceived as an effective moment rather than an individual agency. The new materialist approach to power and resistance posited by Fox and Aldred suggests the capacity for resisting emerges through material forces and intensities within various assemblages. And this means, as an effective movement, it's not stable. Rather, it flows and it shifts as relations assemble and reassemble in new open-ended matterings. So it also becomes impossible to think of high heels as an object that either empowers or oppresses the human subject, as this would suggest a linear model of causation in a subject-object binary. Instead, we might think about entanglements or matterings as productive, producing capacities for what the ball-girl body can do in particular moments. But it's not that anything or everything is always possible. Rather, limits and possibilities are continually reconfigured depending on the relations at play. And for me, this has helped attend to some of the messy, some of the mundane, some of the contradictory aspects of girls' entanglements with the school ball, generating new questions, new wonderings about what or who comes to matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Beautifully timed as well. This panel is rocking in terms of its timing, and also the amazing connections that I'm sure we'll make after. Our last speaker is Hannah Maitland, whose talk is called "This Barbie's Pregnant: Revisiting the Discursive Landscape of Pregnant Doll Controversies." Take it away, Hannah.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully this is working. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Hannah. Big thank you to my co-panelist, the moderator, and to the whole Girlhood Studies Collective. I'm very excited to be here today. My name's Hannah. I live and work in Takaranto. I'm currently on Treaty 13 territory with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm also a member of CUPE 3903, and we're entering the 7th week of our strike from York University for better wages and work conditions. So any solidarity you can spare is much appreciated. So even before Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie, you probably had some vague awareness that Mattel once tried to sell a pregnant Barbie doll. Maybe you even had one yourself. This curious toy is often remembered in endless online listicles about banned and controversial toys, with headlines like 27 shocking things that have been done to Barbie, top 10 dubious toys, or too gay, too weird, too pregnant, the most controversial Barbie dolls in history. And that's just to name a few. There was a real pregnant doll named Midge, released as part of Mattel's Happy Family line in 2002, and according to these endless clickbait articles, she was something of a disaster. Midge was a novel doll with a detachable magnetic womb and an accompanying baby curled up inside. As the story goes, she made her debut just in time for Christmas and was immediately the object of intense controversy. Despite her tiny wedding ring and photos of her wedding day printed on the box, when she was seen standing alone and pregnant in her packaging, many assumed Midge to be an expectant teenager who would send the wrong kind of message to little girls. Parents complained that such a doll was entirely inappropriate, and customer reaction was so negative that American Walmarts refused to sell the doll. Mattel had to repackage Midge without her pregnant belly and with a chaperoning cardboard cutout of her husband, Alan, to reassure buyers that Midge was supposed to be seen as a married adult woman. An Alan doll was also sold separately with their oldest son, Ryan, though there does not appear to have been any substantive outrage about a doll depicting single fatherhood. In many ways, the response to Happy Family Midge is a common sort of moral panic, the kind of quick and explosive series of misunderstandings and intense reactions we expect to find whenever childhood, gender, and sexuality intersect. However, I still find the details of this story compelling. If Midge was such a flop, why did she stay on store shelves for another 3 years? And why was she re-released twice with new accessories, playsets, and more babies? Why do these endless clickbait articles exaggerate an already interesting story and editorialize fantastic details onto what happened? If pregnant dolls are such a troublesome commodity, why are there so many of them? The thing is, Midge has come to stand in for all pregnant dolls and has curiously overshadowed her contemporaries, like Hasbro's 1993 Mommy's Secret Surprise, Tyco Toys' 1992 Mommy's Having a Baby, Judith Corporation's 1991 Mommy to Be doll, and Mattel's own new arrival Mom and Baby all the way back in 1986. There have been so many of these pregnant dolls over the years, most of which tried the exact same conservative educational marketing and met the same controversial fate, but I'm left to believe that the persistence of their creation and controversy signals something more, or is at least worth unpacking further. In this paper, I argue that the repeated efforts to sell pregnant dolls are indicative of a deeper tension between an adult desire to educate children about pregnancy and try to render it normal, even aspirational for girls, and adult anxiety about what happens when children are exposed to the sexual suggestiveness of pregnancy. Though Midge and her peers intentionally depict the hegemonic heteronormative ideals of the procreative consumer nuclear family, even the most idealized and sanitized depiction of the pregnant body that can be cast in plastic is still haunted by sexuality. These curious toys are galvanizing objects that reveal the intense contradictions around gender and sexuality in the social construction of girlhood. So I just mentioned that the backlash to Midge represents a familiar kind of moral panic, and that's because media stories about girls, girlhood, or anything girl adjacent tend to be framed like this. In her 2020 book, Girls, Moral Panic and News Media, Troublesome Bodies, Sharon Mazzarella argues that girls are routinely framed through a risk paradigm in American media. Girls are both at risk of succumbing to social pressures that demean or victimize them, and they pose a risk to the familiar social order by refusing to adhere to the expected norms of femininity and engaging in quote-unquote deviant behaviors. As you would expect, this line between who is a victim and who is a perpetrator of these harms is almost always drawn by the lines of racism, colonialism, classism, or other sites of oppression. Well, these moral panics often take the form of sex panics about things like teen pregnancy or sexting. The function of these panics is to reaffirm a status quo that is seemingly under threat. So I think that this tendency towards policing moral panics around girlhood is what has made these dolls so contentious, but now is probably a good time to just admit that they are kind of unsettling. We all know that fashion dolls have unrealistic body proportions, but trying to depict pregnancy in this medium really escalates the whole thing to the level of farce. Hasbro's Mommy's Secret Surprise doll came pregnant with twins, and her entire abdomen swivels around to show either a pregnant belly, a flat stomach, or the two babies inside. Japan's pregnant Lika doll came with a giant key to unlock her body and reveal her baby. If you've ever taken an interest in these dolls or come across one of these many articles about them, you've probably seen this specific photograph of a Judith Corporation's Mommy to Be doll. This picture comes from the Barbie display at the Prague Toy Museum, where Judith has been erroneously displayed and labeled as a pregnant midge for nearly 20 years. This seems to be a simple case of mistaken identity, like how many of these dolls could there be? But it's hard to ignore that this picture is commonly circulated because it is so shocking. Once Judith's pregnant belly is removed, her body is revealed to be hollow, with a smiling fetus waiting within her cavernous form. A panel moves forward once the baby is removed, and her body springs back to a flat stomach instantly. In the Prague Toy Museum, Judith is displayed naked from the waist up, the only undressed doll, with her pregnant belly sitting off to the side, and her face frozen into that pleasant grin. Her baby, also smiling, sits upside down in the exposed space of her hollow abdomen, staring out at the viewer. Despite coming to represent the apparently shocking idea of a pregnant doll, Happy Family Midge is actually the most sanitized depiction of pregnancy among her peers. Once her pregnant belly is removed, Midge is indistinguishable from non-pregnant fashion dolls. Midge's belly and baby adhere to her body through hidden magnets, and once they're gently detached, the doll underneath bears no visible sign of pregnancy. There are no seams, buttons, or cavities to mark her as a different sort of doll. But even these careful design choices do not smooth over the sympathetic feeling of horror you get when you think of a body being curiously torn apart and inspected by a child. These voyeuristic and scopophilic representations of a pregnant body are striking and call on the kinds of visceral averse reactions that would understandably lead one to think that maybe this is all a bit graphic. Their hollow bodies aside, what I tend to find unsettling is the marketing around these dolls. I think it's easy to roll our eyes at people who think a doll will incite teen pregnancy, but there's still criticisms to be made about who gets to be represented as the ideal aspirational pregnant subject. The inequality of who society thinks should be allowed to be pregnant and how and why and when is so common that it's a mundane kind of violence, the kind of thing that is fought at the level of government policy right down to children's toys. Lots of people of all ages and genders enjoy Barbie dolls, but they're generally targeted at young girls. As a ubiquitous girlhood toy, dolls are often an object that provides focus to these panics around what the status quo of normal families, childhoods, and femininity can look like, and the kinds of lives girls should want. Notably, the pregnant dolls I've been describing emerged in the 1990s, a time described as an era of girls in crisis anxiety, where the media circulated endless moral panics about how girls were failing to thrive, either because of too much or not enough feminism, depending on who you asked. Not only was celebrity culture obsessed with the bodies and behaviors of famous young women at the time, but the media obsession with teen pregnancy that would result in shows like Teen Mom or 16 and Pregnant was well underway. With these well-established discourses, it's unsurprising that Midge was quickly read through these prisms of risk and harm. However, the same dynamic that make Midge and her contemporaries controversial are also the reason they exist. The teen pregnancy anxiety crashes into the patriarchal expectation that though girls shouldn't be mothers right now, they should aspire to motherhood later. The idea that girls' reproduction needs intense adult regulation from an early age is actually a shared value between the creators and detractors of these dolls. At the end of the day, these dolls are commodities. They exist to turn a profit, but the professed reason by the companies who make them is that they're both fun and educational. When defenders of these pregnant dolls discuss them online, they do often assert that they were given the doll because a family member was pregnant, or their parents wanted to encourage their curiosity. It's clear that there was a consumer demand for the dolls as a kind of sex education, but their marketing frames this endeavor in the most conservative terms possible. It appears that Mattel created the first pregnant doll for the American market around 1986 as part of their popular Heart Family line of dolls. The set epitomized the ideal of the nuclear family, and the marketing heavily emphasized the domestic wholesomeness of the dolls. One especially direct print ad read, "Wouldn't you want your little girl to play with this family?" When a pregnant version of Mrs. Hart, who had no name, she was just Mrs. Hart, became available for purchase, an LA Times article from 1986 titled "New Line of Dolls is a Blessed Event for Mattel" quoted Mattel spokeswoman Kathy Thorpe as saying the doll was a response to consumer demand, but was completely separate from the Barbie line because, quote, "we couldn't want anyone to think Barbie's expecting because she's not married," end quote. This early maternal doll does not seem to have been especially controversial, but she was also not really pregnant. Instead, she was a regular doll with an enormous pink smock to give the illusion of pregnancy. Still, even this warranted preemptive cautions, like assuring consumers that the doll was in fact married. Nearly a decade later, more ambitious pregnant dolls emerged. One doll collector, Debbie Behan Garrett, described 1992 as, quote, "the year of the gravid doll," when the Judith Corporation's Mommy to Be doll and Raffler's Karen Mother with Baby became available. They were soon joined by Tyco Toys' Mommy's Having a Baby and Hasbro's Mommy's Secret Surprise dolls in 1993. I don't know why these dolls all appeared simultaneously, but they each employed similar marketing techniques. Much like the Hart family, the advertising for these later dolls is steeped in the conservative language of adult supervision, expert endorsement, and domestic bliss. The Tyco and Hasbro dolls had television ads depicting a pregnant mother gifting the doll to a young daughter. The doll may be a toy, but she's framed as facilitating a necessary conversation between parent and child. Happy Family Midge came with an accompanying article on Barbie.com to explain that she was meant to satisfy young girls' desire for nurturing play and function as a helpful prop for parents to explain the arrival of a new sibling. This Barbie.com article, unfortunately, has not been archived in any legible form on the internet, but according to news reporting at the time, it enlisted the expertise of University of Southern California psychology professor Joanne Farver, who felt the doll, quote, provides a way to talk about pregnancy without elaborating on the details a child can't fully comprehend, end quote. The Raffler, Hasbro, and Judith dolls also came packaged with testimony from child psychologists who attested to the doll's role in a child's healthy development. Judith was advertised as, quote, more than a toy. She provides a natural way for your child to learn while playing. Though her plastic body is far from natural, this marketing argues that children are already interested in pregnancy, and this curiosity is satisfied rather than incited by the doll. Because pregnant dolls are positioned as explicitly pedagogical, the contentious discourses about what exactly Barbie dolls teach children can't be ignored. When marketed as an overt teaching tool, the pregnant doll, with its unavoidable sexuality and painted on wedding ring, has a more challenging time fitting into the defense that doll play is an imaginative space divorced from the intended narratives of the doll. Unlike other dolls whose profession is defined by their outfits, accessories, or the story on a long discarded box, the pregnant doll has a different body from their peers. Their intended story sticks more tenaciously, and they become the bearer of these broader tensions about what dolls teach children and whether this messaging is realistic, appropriate, or beneficial. We know that girls are not just passive consumers. They often use dolls to act out stories that go far beyond the doll's intended narrative. There isn't much scholarship or even journalism about how children actually take up these pregnant dolls, but there's a fair bit of online recollection across doll blogs and retrospective articles. Many people report manipulating their pregnant dolls' bodies beyond the intended imaginative play of pregnancy. Apparently, these dolls were very useful for storing all kinds of things. However, there are limits to these interventions. For example, in Girl Doll, Barbie's Puberty Manual, Catherine Driscoll argues that girls and their dolls are always caught in a cycle of meaning making, where girls engage in gender games with Barbies that can be surprisingly untethered from usual gender norms, but these norms still contour the possibilities of this kind of creative play. For example, it is interesting to me that pregnant dolls for the American market always depicted both a white and Black family. The intention here is to make the dolls representative and depict a happy family where any parent and child could belong. However, as great as this representation is, it reveals how unrepresentative it is to only show pregnancy in the context of middle-class married life. The creative bodies of these dolls hold a lot of queer possibilities, that they evoke sex but don't actually require it to reproduce. The pregnant doll could make herself pregnant and not pregnant with either a baby or a handful of paper clips at will. I love the queer and trans potentiality of these dolls and their fantastical bodies, but this doesn't change the fact that Midge could only be returned to store shelves with a reassuring cutout of her husband, certainly not her wife. A plastic pregnant body could be anything, and while Simba Toys did venture to make a pregnant mermaid doll, the pregnant body of these dolls is still always shown as unambiguously female. Like most feminists, I have a complicated relationship with these dolls, what they are and what they could be. Maybe with the return of the Barbie movie, Midge will have her comeback and we'll see a return of these curious pregnant characters. But that's my time, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. A lot of rich conversation here, I'm sure. I was just struck by all of the many connections, and I see hands up already, so I'm not even going to give you the notes I made in case there were no, or was that clapping? I think it was clapping. Okay, so I'll quickly just run through some of my thoughts while people feel comfortable if they like to raise their hand. People can put a question in the chat. However you like to do it is a-okay. But I just wanted to make note of the fact that these talks really drew on the power of materiality and the power of objects, from polymers to dolls to high heels, that the liveliness of matter was really focused on, and the interconnectivity of people and things and how those things intersect in either resistant or traditional or underground ways. So we talked about play as capitalist resistance. We talked about play as never being the same twice. We talked about bodies as unstable and performative phenomenon. And then, of course, a memorable line from the last talk, who is the ideal aspirational pregnant subject? So all of these things really resonated for me as a sort of affect posthuman theorist who's always focusing on materiality. Would anyone like to pose a question? And that would include the panel as well. You can unmute and just start talking, or you can type away. Well, while you're thinking, I have a question, and this question can be for anybody who'd like to ask. I'm wondering if you think the people who engage with these objects, whether they be younger girls or teen girls or, punk music enthusiasts, Do you think that they feel the connection to those material objects? Do they see them as objects, as material, or do you think that they understand these particular things differently? Maybe they don't give any thought to it at all. But I'd love to hear what the panel thinks about the power of these objects in relation to the users or the listeners or the creators.
I can jump
I'll
in.
just, oh, go ahead, Tony.
Yes. Go
I was
ahead.
just thinking about the high heels and sort of how the girls in my research talked about them, and I think they they knew that they were it was sort of a dominant expectation, that they were kind of it, it was in terms of what was seen as expected for femininity in that school ball space, and they were also aware of some of the dynamics. Like one of the things that came up was the height of a date. So the height of a date compared to their shoes, and wearing high heels, they were really aware of those, particularly if it was a male date, they were aware of those heterosexual dynamics, that an awareness of didn't want them to be taller, or that there was a sort of perception that they shouldn't be taller than their male date. So they were also kind of, they were aware of these things, but there was something, I think that's what's fascinated me about the heels. There was sort of an allure or something interesting about them that was more than just sort of those dynamics and constraints. There was something, just one example is when they said, one of the participants was like, they were taking a male date to the ball and he was shorter, so she had to sort of which she feels sort of spared his ego and wore kind of smaller heels, but then said, next year I'm going solo so I can go really high. And so to me this was really interesting, because it was sort of there's multiple discourses at play, isn't there? There's sort of the heterosexuality and the taking a date, which often there's this perception that taking a date's important, but actually next year I'll go on my own and I can do what I want with my shoe. But yeah, so it was sort of, it's just really, it was so complex and fascinating and contradictory, and I think for me there was a real awareness. They were definitely aware of those dominant discourses, but there's still something kind of curious about them as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. It's so interesting to me how much rich scholarship and theorizing can come out of the shoes. And of course, like hair, shoes are very important in many women's and girls' identities and negotiations of identity. So thank you.
Mm.
Would anyone else like to jump in?
I'll say that polystyrene, Marian Elliott, she went by both names, but I think she just had a really ambivalent relationship with plastics, and plastics weren't a big thing in my paper, but it's a real central material for her during this time. Vinyl, plastic, polymers, synthetics. She put them front and center to kind of highlight the dangers of them that she saw, even though a lot of folks weren't really seeing that. They were seeing this as like a really positive technology. Clothing didn't have to be ironed as much, so it like took a lot of pressure off of this sort of like traditional housewife gender role that she plays with as well. But she used it, she presented them as harmful, but also used it as protection for her body as well. She would piece together vinyl dresses in like these really wild colors and wear them to shows where punks were spitting and bleeding and barfing. It's just like these really wild heavy material circumstances that were dangerous, and in those cases she was protected by that material. So it's like a really rich, interesting relationship, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to think about the negotiations of plastics given the current environmental context as well. I mean, polystyrene was definitely ahead of her time, right? Um, we do have a question in the chat for Hannah. This is from Sophia. Have you considered that Midge is a surrogate for Alan and Ken?
Yes, I have, because they're very explicitly that, actually, on the part of sort of Mattel's canonical storytelling. So Midge, the character, was actually introduced in sort of the 1960s. She was Barbie's first friend. There's a long-standing kind of, assumption that Midge was introduced. She had a rounder face, she had freckles. She was supposed to be kind of the cute girl next door counterpart to Barbie, who was sort of sexy, maybe seen as, a bit much for little girls on the part of some mothers. That doesn't necessarily seem to be explicitly true. But historically, as long as Midge has existed, she's the one that gets the big wedding set. She gets married, she has children, she sort of sticks to the domestic sphere while Barbie has all her careers. So in the Happy Family set, there's Midge and Alan and their other children and Midge's parents, and Barbie's involved, and she's the gynecologist. So she gets to hold this sort of career woman status, which Mattel is very intentional that they never want to interrupt with. So there's all this sort of marketing around Midge that's like, yeah, she's a Barbie doll, but Midge is not Barbie. Barbie's not pregnant. Barbie's not married. Barbie is free from all of this. It's Midge who takes on these sort of very heteronormative, more conservative storylines from Mattel's perspective.
Thank you. It seems like Midge takes the fall so that Barbie can go on in her gloriousness, like Midge does all the heavy lifting. We just have 2 minutes left, but I have a question for Sue Min as well. I really loved your theorizing. I thought it was gorgeous. And you talked a lot at the beginning about play never being the same twice. I'm thinking of this Buddhist proverb where you never step into the same river twice because the water moves so fast that even as you're stepping into it, it changes around you, which is a really nice metaphor, I think, for the affect that occurs between an object and a person engaging with it like a doll. I wonder if you could just spend, a minute or half a minute commenting a bit more about this idea of play never being the same. Is this why play is so engaging?
So this originally came from Heraclitus fragment B52. It was appropriated by Nietzsche and Heidegger in 2 different ways, but the original fragment is about, so before that, in ancient Greek philosophy, there were a lot of metaphors about play and plaything, and in there, play is what God is doing, and their plaything is human. But in Heraclitus B52, he reversed this metaphor into there's a child playing, it might be translated to draught, or what is it in English? Draught, like a chess draw, something like that. And so in that fragment, it is child who has the kingly power to play, and their plaything actually is Ayan, which can be translated into both time or something like world. So by reversing that, it was originally something like, so there's a principle in this world, like natural law, like gravity, which is created by, I don't know, God or something, some divine figure, which for us human, we cannot change that. We cannot engage in the making of that process, making of the principle of that. But in the reversed version of Heraclitus, metaphor, the child is the one who is having power to engage by playing. See, so but the metaphor, the reason that why Heraclitus assumingly placed child in that subject, not adult, is because by Nietzsche and Heidegger's understanding is because they are the only figure that can play everything like anew. Because if there was adult in the subject, they probably would go for figuring out the odds of the play or like the principle of the play or design of the play. But child, they never do that. They just play because they play, right? So that is a reason that they can do things differently every time, like anew, right? So yeah, it originally came from there.
Thank you so much. That's a great note to end on, actually. I'd like to thank Dawn, Sumin, Tony, and Hannah. These were really wonderful talks. Thank you so much. And we'll see you at the next panel. Coming, last panel, I think. Yeah? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sean.